This is Dr. Dan, and this is my Thanksgiving monologue for 2024. Even though American history is largely sanitized or ignored in today's government schools, most children know that the Pilgrims sailed from England to America on the Mayflower in 1620 and landed at Plymouth Rock in what is now Massachusetts. For much of the Middle Ages, the leader of the Church of England was the Archbishop of Canterbury, and the church itself was closely allied with the Roman Pope and the Roman Catholic Church. During the reign of King Henry VIII, Pope Clement VII refused to sanction the annulment of King Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon. As a result, King Henry forced Parliament to pass a series of acts that created a Church of England, separate from the papal hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church. In 1534, King Henry was installed as the head of the English Church, which then became the official Church of England. After the Reformation, England had become deeply divided between Catholics, loyal to the Pope, and Protestant adherents of the Church of England. The Puritans were a small sect of devout Christians who were extremely dissatisfied with the beliefs and dictates of the Church of England. They refused to swear obedience to the Church of England and were oppressed and ostracized from English religious society. About 100 members searching for religious freedom fled to Holland. Feeling insecure there as well, however, they voted to emigrate to America. Groups who needed money for colonization initiatives in the New World were financed by private companies who provided the necessary funds along with rules and requirements. The Puritans received financial support from the Virginia Company of London and the Virginia Company of Plymouth. In return for funding the journey, the financiers required a 7-year contract, during which the survival goods of the new colony, food, clothing, shelter, equipment, etc., would be considered common goods belonging to all members. In addition, all profits and surplus commodities became part of the common goods and were to be distributed equally to all colonists and used to pay back the financiers. So 200 years before Karl Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto, Plymouth Colony actually became the first socialist commune in America. Private property rights simply did not exist, and the common good took precedence over the contributions and needs of the individual. The Pilgrims landed in Massachusetts in December, the beginning of winter, which proved to be so harsh that only half of the Pilgrim colonists survived. The new survivalists did not have the skills or knowledge to grow crops in a new environment. Even though the Pilgrims were assisted by the local native tribes, the harvests of 1621 and 1622 were not sufficient to avoid serious shortages of food and other necessities. Faced with dwindling supplies and insufficient food, the social problems usually associated with collectivist societies soon developed. Healthy young men were forced to share the fruits of their labor with the old and infirm without compensation. They considered that an injustice. The women had to perform household chores for everyone, not just their own husbands and children, which they considered a form of slavery. After 2 years of starvation, injustice, discontent, and grumbling, William Bradford, the governor of Plymouth Colony, decided to abandon socialism and avoid another year of famine. He assigned each family a parcel of land to grow their own food and to keep the profits from the harvest. Amazingly, colonists who were previously sickly and disabled became productive members of their family enterprise. The corn crop tripled in size. As a result, there was sufficient surplus to export a full boatload of corn and buy out the ownership interest of their colonial financiers. The transition from the socialist commune to a free market economy with private property rights was thereby complete. This is the true story of the first permanent European settlement in the New World. I think the history of Plymouth Colony is a timely and stimulating topic of conversation this year as you join with family and friends to celebrate Thanksgiving. It should serve as a lesson for those who have forgotten that there has never been a successful socialist society in human history. It is a well-proven fact that removal of the profit motive for the individual reduces productivity and leads to dependency. After our commercial break, I will return with more lessons from history that teach us how to live with each other in peace and harmony. This is Dr. Dan. While you're hanging out with family and friends or sitting down to Thanksgiving dinner, here are a few more thoughts to consider. The United States is not a democracy. You should have learned that in civics class. Democracy is mob rule, where 51% of the people control everything. The majority, even by one vote, makes all the rules for everyone. That's why you hear the Marxists and the global elite talking about saving our democracy. Democracy is almost always a precursor to dictatorship. When the majority can outvote and rule over the minority, oppressive totalitarian government is inevitable. Freedom of choice and individual freedom are gone. The United States is a constitutional republic in which the natural law rights of the minority, even a minority of one single person, are protected by the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, no matter what the majority wants. So, stop using the phrase, our democracy. Only a constitutional republic guarantees individual freedom. To our founders, a person's private property consisted of your land and home, your possessions, the work of your hands, the ideas of your mind, and your life itself. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights required the federal government to protect and secure those rights for each of us. The Fourth Amendment prevents search and seizure without a properly executed warrant, and the Third Amendment prevents government soldiers from occupying private homes. The Second Amendment guarantees our individual right of self-protection from others and from a tyrannical government. Direct taxation on individuals and income was prohibited by Article 1, as was the suspension of habeas corpus. Article 1 also established the right to patent an individual's ideas, compositions, and inventions. Our founders believed that the totality of a citizen's private property was the basis for individual freedom. The American Constitutional Republic, governed by we the people and for we the people, empowers authority at the local level. When federal government is both properly limited in power and entirely constrained by the Bill of Rights, each state reflects the desires of its citizens, not necessarily those of other states. Individual mobility allows citizens to relocate when necessary, to congregate with others who share similar and compatible beliefs, and by their presence together, to define the governmental authority of their state, as required by the constitutionally enumerated powers, Article 1, Section 8. Central government authority is limited to those few functions best accomplished at a national level. The Ninth and 10th Amendments clearly reserve all other powers to the states and to their citizens. Since the early 1900s, the collectivist left has been successful in gradually and quietly implementing democratic fascist collectivism in America, using a combination of legislation, regulation, amendments to the Constitution, and decisions by the federal court system and the Supreme Court. They have increased the size and power of the federal government at the expense of the constitutional authority given to states and to the individual. The year 1913 was a disastrous year for individual freedom and states' rights, with the 16th Amendment, federal income tax, the 17th Amendment, the popular election of senators, and the establishment of the Federal Reserve Bank, all of which significantly reduced the power of the states versus that of the federal government. Since then, the march toward collectivism and one-world fascist government has been promoted by a biased media and a compliant federal court system that has failed miserably to force the other two branches of government to live within the restrictions demanded by the Constitution. The foundation of our constitutional republic is an unbiased judiciary, relying not on personal opinion, but on the written law. For the federal court system, that body of law is our Constitution that created a legally constrained separate entity, the federal government, which was not a party to that contract. It was expected that judges would listen to arguments from all sides, debate principles and remedies amongst themselves, and then make judicial decisions based on the words of the Constitution. Many Supreme Court justices over the past 100 years, however, have voted for and have written opinions that are in direct contradiction to those very doctrines on which our nation was founded. Their false and misguided rationale is the notion that the Constitution allows them to ignore the written text and apply the realities of modern life to change the rules. Their true purpose is to circumvent the constitutional restraints on governmental authority and to fundamentally change America and eliminate individual rights. Article 1 of our Constitution states, "All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and House of Representatives." All legislative powers. Where do those words allow a president or an appointed judge to create law? As a textualist, I vigorously dispute the right of the judiciary or of any branch of government to illegally amend the Constitution. In current times, however, we live in a tyranny of the bureaucracy. Employees and agents of the alphabet agencies of the federal bureaucracy are blatantly disobeying the Constitution. They have become legislators by writing law, then enforcing their illegal laws, acting as judges and juries by imposing unconstitutional regulations and punishments on the American people. Because they are unelected and unsupervised adequately by Congress, the people cannot easily seek amends for these illegal actions. The Supreme Court consists of men and women who are supposed to ignore their own personal opinions and prejudices to make judicial decisions based on the written law. Increasingly, federal judges at all levels ignore or deliberately obfuscate the written text of the law to inject social engineering concepts and political bias into each decision. In direct contradiction to our Constitution, legislating from the bench has become the new normal, and in many cases acts to illegally amend the Constitution. These judges and justices are enabled by a cadre of willing lawyers financed by special interest groups who pursue litigation in response to every bureaucratic regulation and legitimately enacted federal law. They search for known sympathetic judges, wasting time and public funds to delay or prevent implementation of congressional legislation and the people's will. The entire federal judiciary has become a legislative superbranch, more powerful in many ways than Congress or even the executive. They make law without being directly accountable to the people. We have just seen a great awakening of regular Americans who finally rose up on Election Day and said, "We have had enough. We will no longer tolerate a lawless, immoral federal government who ignores our constitutional right, steals our private property, and limits our freedom." That is why the collectivist, fascist left is so angry. The rising tide of populist anger has blown the tank treads off a century-long juggernaut of arrogant, elitist, collectivist victories. When a spoiled, undisciplined brat's parents finally take away the car keys, a temper tantrum of epic proportions can be expected, and that is what is occurring in our country today, and I guarantee it'll get worse. Having taken a stand, we cannot tolerate capitulation or compromise if we are to restore the constitutional foundation of our country. For us, at this point, there can be absolutely no turning back. Here's one final thought. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had a dream that his children would not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Each of us should share that same dream, that we be judged as individuals and not by meaningless differences based on political agendas. When government policy favors one group over another, resentment will always lead to divisive anger. No longer can we disagree without being hateful to each other. Do you want to live in peace again? There are 3 rules. Live and let live. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And don't hurt anyone, and don't take their stuff. This is Dr. Dan. Resist tyranny and trust in freedom. And have a happy Thanksgiving.